Much has been made of video game graphics for as long as the medium's been around. It's been within the last couple of generations, particularly with PCs and consoles boasting more and more power to create visually stunning games, where we start diving into discussions about whether too much focus is being paid on graphics over other important elements like gameplay and story. I mean, we ourselves here on DLC have batted around that idea very often. But today we put those debates aside and focus entirely on the prey. Games that stick out in our consciousness because, in part, they were so beautiful to look at and enjoy as we journeyed through them. So today we're going to show our appreciation of the pixels, next on Downloadable Content. Welcome to Downloadable Content. I'm Brian, and with me, it's another Ron and Ron show.
Yep.
Absolutely.
It's Ron squared again, so back to the trio here to talk about pretty video games. Not going to even talk about, are graphics more important or anything like that. This episode is just we're going to be doing a lot of ogling and oohing and eyeing across the generations here. So before we dive into that discussion, just want to remind everyone that every single episode of Downloadable Content can be found on our website, dlcpodcast.com, as well as iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. You can also check out upcoming recordings on the website, give us feedback. You can also find us on Facebook at Downloadable Content and on Twitter at DL Content. So it's all there for your DLC needs, all 170 plus episodes at your fingertips. All right, gentlemen, let us go to work. I'm sure that, when we are talking about games that we have come to appreciate as just gorgeous, I'm sure there's going to be some games that we talk about that are pretty common, but I'm very curious as we dive in to see how the lists diverge, because we have all played a variety of games, going back to the NES to now. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we all have in store. So, we had a suggestion to start, back a few geologic eras. And so that's what we are going to do. We're just going to lay this out instead of going all over the place. So the NES is where we're going to start at because, I don't know if the E.T. on the Atari or Space Invaders or Gorf will inspire pretty...
The best graphics in the world, Zork.
Yes, because text-based RPGs are just absolutely stunning.
It's all in your imagination, my friend.
It is, and there's no better place for beauty, visual immense scenes than in your own imagination. Thank you, LeVar Burton. So NES.
I mean, if we're talking NES, I think for me, there's a bunch of games. But for me, two games really come to mind for how they built their atmosphere through their artwork, and that's Castlevania and Metroid. in very different ways, they built these atmospheres that were very different than all of the games around them.
They definitely evoke a mood, and that is largely due to visuals as well as music. I mean, I remember just I didn't play the original Castlevania, but I did play the original Metroid, and even though Metroid is a very sparse game, what it has visually and audibly makes it stand out.
You feel so alone in Metroid, and I don't know how they managed that. When you're no more alone than you are in any other video game, you still only have Mario on screen with enemies, the same with Metroid, but they really were able, through that art, to evoke this feel of being on a hostile alien world. And Castlevania takes a lot from Gothic architecture and just kind of brought more into itself than you typically saw in games at the time.
I would agree with that. I mean, again, with as limited by the technology of the NES was, and the sort of the limited color palette that it has, there were some very, very good examples of what you could do with those limits.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, another game that I think everybody had experience with, that I think kind of set the standard for the NES at the time, was Super Mario Bros. 3. With the level of detail that it was able to do, and the colors, and the designs of the different worlds. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I got to Giant Land the first time, and all of the art assets are 4 times the size.
And could pass very well for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, they really spent the time on their art on Super Mario Bros. 3. And I really feel like, not that there aren't games that surpassed it, but that it set the new standard for what people expected for graphics.
And those graphics only got, I mean, the Mario platformers were greatly improved when they came over to Super Nintendo under the Mario All-Stars collection.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Other games I want to mention from the NES era that I remember being memorable for the sprite animations and it's just an example of like what sprite work, of how animated and detailed you can be with sprite work. Ninja Gaiden, like the first 2 or 3 Ninja Gaiden games, like that was a relatively limited color palette, and they had a lot of like texture and detail in the map of the levels that you just didn't, was like unheard of at the time, pretty much.
And the cutscenes.
Yeah.
Oh, because the cutscenes made me, as a kid when I played it, just made me immediately think of panels out of a comic book.
They really, yeah, it really did feel like something right out of a comic book, and it really wasn't something like. Can you really think of a game that used cutscenes as well in that time period?
I mean, I personally can't.
Yeah, neither can I.
No, jump off the top of my head in my mind. Another game we've all seen it, I think, and we know how difficult it is. But for as buggy and as fucked up as this game is, it definitely had some style to it. The Battletoads game for NES.
Okay, before we went into this, because I made my initial list, and then I went up looking online going, best looking games of each of these generations, to see if there was something I was missing or I was blanking on.
Yeah.
And I found that on best and worst graphics lists. The graphics on that game are so polarizing. But I 100% agree with you. That game has so many issues, but its graphics are not one of them. That game looked great for what it was trying to do.
Yeah, for the idea of it being a side-scrolling beat-em-up game that had a very limited color palette available to it, it evoked that arcade style, those arcade side-scrollers very, very well.
Absolutely. Another game that this is a deeper cut, though I brought it up on the podcast before, is the graphics in Sweet Home. If for people who may not have heard of it, or if you guys don't remember when I brought it up before, Sweet Home was a NES game that never came to America. It's a Japanese exclusive, and basically it was the Resident Evil was a spiritual successor to it. It was actually originally going to be a direct successor to it, and they changed it midway through development. But it was a fairly graphic horror game where your characters, when they died, would literally be sliding down a bloody wall. And you would have pretty gruesome deaths and pretty gruesome characters in an RPG. It probably has some of the best individual sprite work on the NES. I don't think it quite pops the way some of the other games do, because since it used a horror aesthetic, it was more muted than some other things. More muted than... Yes?
Go on.
I say more muted than, say, Mega Man 2, which popped. That probably had the best use of color in the NES.
I would also add, if we're talking, colors, the one other game that springs to mind just right off the top of my head as visually stunning for the NES, Kirby's Adventure.
Yeah. That's one that, I mean, take a look at modern Kirby games. How much of has these designs and this art changed over the years? Not a whole hell of a lot. They nailed it from the beginning.
Just when, I played, obviously first Kirby game ever created was Kirby's Dream Land on the Game Boy, which,
yes.
But then they basically made that game and made it much bigger for the
and in color.
And I just remember all of the vibrant, bright, happy colors, your bright blues and greens, and you get to see Kirby in all of his pink glory, and it's so bright. And you're right, that is a design choice for at least for the franchise that has continued on.
Now I have the Kirby Victory theme stuck in my head. Thanks, Brian.
Oh, you're welcome. And it was that game, and that game was very, very late NES, so, I think we were definitely into Super Nintendo by that point anyway, so it was probably, for all of the animations and all of the colors in that game, that had to have been approaching max capacity on the cartridge.
I'm a little surprised they didn't switch it to an SNES release, considering how late it was. That's neither here nor there. Just a thought I've had.
I'm looking it up right now. So Kirby's Adventure came out in Japan March 23rd, 1993. And that came out in North America a couple months later.
Yeah.
Super Nintendo had been out for 3 years by then in Japan, and over a year and a half in the States.
Yeah, I have no idea why they didn't transition it to the Super Nintendo. Seems like a no-brainer. I mean, that's why
they had a Kirby game on Super Nintendo, and they also had a Kirby Golf game on Super Nintendo.
I'm just saying, that's the reason we didn't get any more Final Fantasies. It's the reason we didn't get Earthbound. It's the reason we didn't get SimCity on the NES, because they transitioned them into the Super Nintendo. yet Kirby didn't. So I don't know. It was just a thought process. There were so many games that were supposed to be on Super Nintendo or they're supposed to be on NES that they literally cut off at the knees because of the Super Nintendo, and then some games like Kirby just made it through somehow, and it's always kind of confused me, especially since Kirby is basically a first-party title, even back then. I mean, I know they had outside people. They had HAL wasn't an internal team at that point, right?
By then, I actually don't know.
I think it was released as a first-party, as a Nintendo-published title, but I believe they were still outside contractors at the time.
Okay.
So I didn't want to call it a full first-party title at that point because of that.
Fair enough. So that was all I thought of for Nintendo, unless you've got more for NES.
No, I'm good.
Probably the last one I can think of is Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
That had some great animation work.
Okay.
So, and the reason why I'm saying that is because it's got a lot of animations in it, and the animations are important because you need that visual tell.
Well, I mean, in so many NES games, you're just a tiny little, 1 inch tall character with the enemies being between 1 and 2 inches. And then in Punch-Out, you have these large, beautiful sprites. It was like nothing else you really saw.
Yeah, and it was important too because you need that larger sprite base so that you could see the animations of the fighters you're fighting against.
Yeah, their tells.
To see their tells, to see when to dodge or when to dip or duck, or when to counter hit, basically, and just knock their block off.
Yeah, absolutely, and there is nothing else I can think of on the NES that was like that. That was definitely the first game to try to go in that direction with sprites, and it became an incredibly memorable game because of that, and we would definitely not have had that without graphics.
And it's a game I still have never beaten because I'd get pretty close, but then I didn't have the reflexes.
The reflexes you need for Tyson are rough.
Meanwhile, people are speedrunning it blindfolded with one person doing the punching and the other person doing the movements.
Yeah, well, okay.
I mean, that was okay. I'm jokingly saying that, but these are people who have played the game so often and so much that they could tell just from the sound bites being played when to dip, when to duck, when to dodge, and when to throw the punches.
I mean, that's talent, and that is talent I will not have. It's pure it's pure sensory memory at that point.
You got to be willing to put the work in, Brian.
And I'm not willing, so there you go.
Think of how many D&D campaigns that you could plan in that time.
And never, how many you could plan and never come to fruition.
I didn't say play. I deliberately didn't say play.
I know.
Very intentional wording on my part.
Scheduling the final boss of any D&D campaign. So... all right. Do we want?
I will. Since we brought that up, I will say, Brian, it is a very amusing. So, remember how my D&D campaign was supposed to be canceled yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah, they uncanceled it, and then I had to recancel it because I already said I was going to do the podcast.
Oh God. Oy. All right. Well.
So podcasts. The bane of D&D scheduling.
Oh, all right, fine. All right, I'll take that. Sure. Yes. Pay attention to me. No. All right, moving along to Super Nintendo.
To the next generation.
I've got Super Nintendo and Genesis games that immediately spring that immediately come to mind.
Well, we did NES last, so why don't we jump into Genesis first?
Okay, that's fine. See, Genesis for me was a system that I did not own very long, so the amount of games I have played on a Genesis are not many. So the game that springs to mind for me when I think graphics, it is a bullet hell shooter type game called Gunstar Heroes.
Abso-fucking-lutely. Gunstar Heroes looks like $1 million.
I was shocked at how much I wound up really enjoying that game, but the visuals make it stand out.
Oh, absolutely. The visuals in that, like, to me, the two best looking Genesis games are Gunstar Heroes and Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which is what I'm going to bring up in a second. But, like, there's not a whole lot in the Genesis that comes close. And I honestly think, overall, a lot of the Genesis had a lot of really good sprite work. And these two just kind of took the cake.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, not to mention, you know, we were just talking about all the different animations that made some of our NES choices, you know, a real standout. I mean, games like Gunstar Heroes, where there is so much happening on the screen at any point.
I was going to say, the games like the Toho games owe something to Gunstar Heroes, as much as they owe stuff from the traditional space shooters.
Like, I know that a similar game to Gunstar Heroes is Metal Slug, but I never played any of the Metal Slug games. I've seen them, but Gunstar Heroes, I just picked up and just couldn't put it down until I beat it.
Wait, you enjoy Gunstar Heroes with all the things flying around on screen, but you don't like Undertale because of the combat? Silently judging you.
That's all right. That's all right. I've been judged for worse. So
I will mention for the Genesis specifically, Comic Zone.
Oh yeah, definitely Comic Zone.
Have you heard this game at all, Brian?
Absolutely, no? Yes, I have.
Okay, so for the listeners who are not aware of what it is quite literally you playing a comic book. It is a side-scrolling beat 'em up, and you transition through the levels as though you are reading a comic book. And each stage is a different panel.
I really think we could use a new Comic Zone game. Let's bring that back.
All right, get on it then.
Sure, I will go and pick up the license for 25 cents and then go to Kickstarter. I have no experience. That won't matter, right? Hasn't stopped anybody else.
Just wait as the money just flows in. But yes, I do remember Comic Zone. I remember playing Comic Zone when it was on the Sega Channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, Ronnie, you were going to
I never had the Sega Channel, so I was not that was not something I had ever experienced.
Oh, neither did I. I would go to friends' houses.
Yeah, my friend owned Comic Zone, and that's how I got my experience playing it.
I almost feel like we should mention to the listeners what the Sega Channel was.
Well, listen up, viewers. We're going to take you on a little adventure back in time.
I would say refer back a couple of seasons.
Yeah, we had a whole podcast talking about.
Yeah, yep. I know we did, but I just want to mention it briefly. You thought the Dreamcast was ahead of its time with like broadband modems and like DVD quality graphics. Here's the fucking Sega Channel doing literal streaming of games to your system through the coaxial cable into your TV, into your system.
Cloud
in
gaming.
1995.
Cloud gaming before it was called cloud gaming.
It's gonna say if you have PlayStation Now, it was kind of like PlayStation Now, but 30 years ago and not good.
And far more expensive.
Yeah.
Far more expensive.
Far more expensive.
And I'm not saying it was a bad idea. It was a good idea. It was an idea ahead of its time. The technology wasn't quite there.
It's like the best way I can describe it would be like, imagine you're trying to make a helicopter in this time era of Leonardo da Vinci. Is it theoretically possible? Yes. Should you do it? Hell no.
That's actually a really good comparison. So, do we have anything else for Genesis, or do we want to move into Super Nintendo?
Oh, I am ready for Super Nintendo.
How about you, Ron?
I guess Contra was on the Genesis, and they had some pretty decent sprite work too. But
they had some really great work on their enemies in that game.
Yeah, I feel like most people know Contra more so from the NES era, and SNES. So
I think the Genesis. Yeah, I think the Genesis Contra looks better than the NES or SNES Contras. Not necessarily that it plays better, but I think it looks better.
And we're talking strictly visuals here, so
yeah. True. Fair enough.
Like none of this is the quality of the games we're talking about on gameplay. Just how pretty it is and how the graphics are and the animations. I mean, one I'll bring up before we move on is Phantasy Star 4. It's rather impressive how good looking Phantasy Star got as it moved away from its earlier roots, and I mean, it's like looking at a divergent evolution for Final Fantasy and which direction it could have gone. And it's one you don't really hear a lot of nowadays. I feel like a lot of people who love Final Fantasy should go back and take a look at the Phantasy Star series, except two. Skip two. Oh, two. I'm like, or is it three? No, it's two. I'm definitely thinking two. But yeah, that's it for me.
But I think we get to the SNES now, and like that's probably what most people think of when they hear like sprite-based games.
Yeah. I mean, I'll throw out because I know one of us has to bring it up. We're contractually obligated to, even on topics it's not involved in. The beauty of Chrono Trigger.
Yes. I mean, that gorgeous game. Absolutely gorgeous game. I think that's a universal.
Yeah, based on the artwork of Akira Toriyama. I mean, his artwork is obviously quite appealing. There's a reason Dragon Ball has sold for our basically entire lifetimes.
When we're talking about this is for me personally. When I think of visually stunning games on the Super Nintendo, there are two games that immediately pop into my brain. The first is Donkey Kong Country. And the second is Super Mario RPG.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah.
Those are two of the games that I actually didn't put on my list because I, after looking at the graphics, did not think the graphics aged well at all.
That's fine. Like I said, this is a matter of personal opinion.
Absolutely it is.
So
absolutely.
It is a thing for, at the time, they were the most graphically intensive things on the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. I know. I love both of them.
I would say Super Mario RPG aged better
than Donkey Kong Country. Yeah, I would agree with you.
I mean, at the time when I played Donkey Kong Country, I mean, I was blown away by just how fluid it looked.
No, I can see that.
Like whether the graphics have aged well in the last 25 years or whatever, that's a whole different discussion. I just know that for me personally, when I think of beautiful looking games, these two pop up immediately for me.
For me, when I think SNES and I'm thinking best looking games, for me what comes to mind is Chrono Trigger and Yoshi's Island.
Okay. I've
God, the fucking mind trip that Yoshi's Island is with a lot of the effects they do to hinder Yoshi from carrying Baby Mario, and the fucking like puff balls or whatever they are, to have you basically it warps the stage weirdly because you're going like a gigantic LSD drug trip for 30 seconds, and you had this fucking Baby Mario screaming in your ear at the top of his goddamn lungs.
I'm trying to remember this because it's been so long since I played Yoshi's Island. That sort of looked like a coloring book, did it not?
It absolutely did.
Okay, yes.
It looked like it was done with crayon.
Okay.
It looks like something that a kid would draw, and that that aesthetic just worked so well on the Super Nintendo. Which, I mean, that's kind of a theme that they've done with a lot of the Yoshi's games. I mean, Yoshi's Woolly World was them trying to do something I think they could only have done on that system, and it looked great too.
Yep.
The Yoshi's Island games always try to go for a very unique aesthetic, and they typically nail it.
I'm just now thinking you put Woolly World in my head, and I'm thinking Kirby's Epic Yarn as well, in the similar similar vein there.
Other ones, we could say Final Fantasy VI, but
I mean, Final Fantasy VI had some pretty detailed sprite work in the characters' expressions and how in the characters' actions and how they were able to I'm using express too much, but express things through so few pixels. But
gesticulate.
Yeah, gesticulate. Thank you. But I do think, as beautiful as it is, I just think if you're going down that route, Chrono Trigger just goes farther with it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But still beautiful.
Yeah. No, I'm not. That's talking about gesticulating. I'm also thinking about Street Fighter 2.
Yeah. I mean,
I can see that.
That is a game that took the general concept of the arcade with the original Street Fighter and then brought it into your home. And the box art, for being as crazy as it was, the sprite work done for it was very well done.
Took the original Street Fighter and made it not bad.
Yeah.
The hot take: the original Street Fighter was not a good game. I don't think that's a hot take. I think that's
I don't think it's a hot take. I think most people would be like, "Yeah, that's not a good game. It's not a very well designed game."
It's an important game because it led to Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I know that some people might put. I know that Star Fox is another one that's sort of an honorable mention for me, because up to that point, I really hadn't played a game where we start taking advantage of polygon graphics.
I want to be like, my personal experience with Star Fox is the graphics, even at the time, were bad enough for me that I could barely tell what was going on.
Really? Okay.
I want to like the game. I owned it and I played it. And I like later Star Fox games, but I can play it now and look at it and go, I don't even know what the fuck that is. I know it's an enemy. I know I need to shoot it. I can't tell what the heck they were trying to do with it, and I can't tell what's going on over here or any of this. Like, it's. I mean, I think I'm in the minority here. I definitely think that a lot of people might put it on a list like this, but for me, They were trying to do stuff with early polygons. I give them a lot of credit for that. This is nothing against that, but they weren't able to do enough stuff with the polygons to make to properly represent what they were trying to do. It's kind of like playing Adventure on the Atari without a manual that tells you what each of these things is supposed to represent. Without that, you're just kind of guessing at what this blob of pixels is.
If we're talking about flying games, I will mention Pilot Wings for the SNES as well.
I've never played Pilot Wings, but
I haven't either. But I'm just like looking at like the various like sprite work of this, and like this is a game that came out in 1990, and
I played the crap out of that.
They have to convey height. They have to convey speed. They have to convey like time, basically.
And that's a big thing for it. I did not have that on my list. I probably should have. I didn't even think about it because that was a release game. Like, all these games we're listing are like 5 years at, like Chrono Trigger and Yoshi's Island for me. Those are 95. They're 5 years later. And Pilot Wings was able to do this as a release game before they really nailed down what you could really push the system to do.
Yeah, and if you want another example of a game that like in like it's like an earlier title, the Super Castlevania 4 came out October 1991, and the graphics in that, again, Castlevania at the time was like talking about like visually stunning. Like, you had a lot of more cutscenes here, a lot of animations. You're seeing a little bit of the Mode 6 being used for the super large candelabra swinging back and forth.
Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see a theme of Castlevanias being listed.
I don't know about that.
What the hell sound effect was that?
Well, I've got at least one more on my list, so...
I mean, yes, fucking Symphony of the Night, but goddamn. Yeah. But I don't know what two brain cells would think that.
That doesn't make it any less beautiful, and that's what we're talking about.
Fair enough.
I got some deep cuts, but you can't snub the obvious ones just because they're obvious.
I'm not. I know. I'm snubbing it more so because it's fucking Konami more than anything else.
That was back before Konami were monsters. Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe, he says. All right.
Some later SNES titles. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Yep.
Other ones, Mega Man X, specifically.
It's amazing because we mentioned Mega Man for the NES, and it's amazing how big of a jump they were able to do with Mega Man X from the NES games, but with how good the NES games looked, and then Mega Man X.
Yeah. Again, just the idea of sprite work and like the idea of good, clean sprite work can convey so much.
Mm-hmm.
And
detailed sprite work too.
Yeah. And you have something as simple as the addition of a dash button, and wall clinging just changes the gameplay of that series so much.
Well, not even just talking about the gameplay, because we're not talking about gameplay, we're talking about beauty. Yeah. Just look at the animations on the wall jump, and just how well they convey what they're doing.
To continue with the NES version, you had Super Punch Out as well, continuing the theme of very important, very, very detailed sprite work to convey visual tells for gameplay.
That is a game I have not played.
Say that game again?
Super Punch Out.
Okay.
Again, it's continuing the idea of larger sprites being able to convey animations and visual tells for the player, and you need this level of detail to convey this. So
I can go with that. I can see that.
And I think the last one on my list, again, is obvious in my opinion, but should be mentioned: Super Metroid.
Super Metroid and Super Mario World, both of those we should mention.
Yeah. Super Mario World for being like the release title, and then Super Metroid kind of showing like the end of the kind of like the sprite work of the SNES.
I mean, as much as I love Chrono Trigger and I love Yoshi's Island, I love a lot of these games we've mentioned, I don't think that anything else on the Super Nintendo really compared to Super Metroid's sprite work on its characters and enemies.
Yeah.
And that was a later Super Nintendo game.
94.
So by then, developers really had a good handle on...
That was 97?
94.
Okay, I thought I heard one of you say 97. I'm like, that does not sound right.
There were some Kirby games that came out in 97, I think.
Of course, Kirby's always late to the
Hey, I was gonna say,
I think it's like Kirby's Dream Land 3 is 97.
They're the Internet Explorer of video game franchise.
Oh,
Kirby's Dream Land 3, November 27th, 1997.
So that game is the Netscape of of
That came okay. Just for reference, that game came out in the same year as Symphony of the Night did.
So, where do we want to go next, gentlemen? N64, PS1.
I mean, technically, it would be Sega Saturn, wouldn't it?
If you want to do that, that's fine. I have not played a single game on the Saturn, so...
Well, Sega Saturn had what? Panzer Dragoon and Symphony of the Night?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to bring up the Saturn because it has one of my favorite games as well as one of the most beautiful games to me, Nights into Dreams. Nights into Dreams is freaking gorgeous, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise. Have either of you two seen Nights into Dreams?
I've seen some videos of it. It looks nice.
I've seen the occasional still, so this is your baby, Ronnie, so go squee about how pretty this game is.
I won't squee about it. I will leave it here. Just Nights into Dreams is a beautiful game with very smooth animations, which they needed to have to convey the feeling of flying, which is what the whole game was trying to showcase in a very dreamlike, fantastical world. I love the animation I love the colors and animations and everything in Nights into Dreams. I feel like the sequel that they did later on the Wii, Night's Journey into Dreams, kind of took what they were doing and was able to finish it in a way that the hardware limitations wouldn't let them do before. It feels like seeing what they were intending for the Saturn. And that's what I will say on that.
Okay.
I will mention as well, you have X-Men versus Street Fighter. That was also on Sega Saturn first. Most people remember it more so being on the PlayStation, but it was first on the Sega Saturn.
Yeah, it absolutely was.
And this is another fighting game with very detailed sprite work and animations put into it to convey just the actions and scenes going on. And being that they are at the time, some of the most popular pop culture things, Street Fighter was riding off of its high. The Street Fighter movie, I think. Let me double check this release date for sure. The Street Fighter movie. Okay, no, it was 2 years since the Street Fighter movie happened, so it was mostly out of the minds of the people, populace. But X-Men was very popular in um, the Americas due to the cartoon series, and a lot of the combine that with a lot of the art styles of the cartoon series, along with the Marvel comics of the '90s, carrying over into that. You see having that level of detail in the cartoons or in the comics show up on the sprite work it was very like visually pleasing.
Yeah. We ready for PlayStation?
I mean, are we going to assume PlayStation includes Castlevania Symphony of the Night?
I mean, we can talk about it now, but yeah, it's getting brought up.
Yeah, use it as a bridge, basically, to bridge off of the Sega Saturn onto the PlayStation.
Because it did both, yes. Though I actually think the artwork looked better on the PlayStation, at least from what I remembered.
If memory serves, it ended up being that the Sega Saturn played better, but the PlayStation was so much more popular.
If I remember correctly, I believe the Saturn one played better, the PlayStation one looked better.
That might be what it is. It's something like that.
Yeah. But, I mean, Symphony of the Night took it to the next level with with the detail that they used. If you just flip Alucard around and just watching that cloak billowing around him and flipping around, and the way his clothes lay, and like they took that they took that far higher than we've seen in almost everything we've mentioned so far.
Mm-hmm.
And the detailed backgrounds and the enemies and the
animations.
The animations. Like, we had an atmosphere during the NES Castlevania that they were able to give us with very rudimentary art at the time. At the time, it was very good, but compared to now, Castlevania Symphony of the Night feels like the natural evolution of that, where now they're finally able to appropriately showcase what they were trying to do earlier. Like, you can see all the birth of Symphony of the Night in games as early as Castlevania 3.
Mm-hmm. It's a little difficult, in my opinion, to start talking about the sprites based specifically of the PlayStation, because this was when we start seeing the push for polygons and the push for 3D graphics.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, for me personally, while I will always have fond memories of the PlayStation 1, this was kind of the graphics. I mean, I know I mentioned earlier that, we're not talking about age, but, now looking at, when we did our PS1 retrospective, we had come to the consensus that many of the games, while memorable, really, really did not age well at all. But I will.
Do you mean just artwork or gameplay wise? Because I would say there are several that aged well gameplay wise. There are, but not as many aged as well art wise.
I'm referring specifically art wise. I mean, there are many games on the PS1 that I have many fond memories about and enjoyed very much.
I mean, I can think of I have a couple games. I mean, one that I wanted to mention that went the 3D route is the Oddworld series. The Oddworld series may not have been pretty, but it was deliberately being ugly. It was trying to express this ugly world, and did it wonderfully with its graphics.
I remember seeing Oddworld, and that was a stylistic choice that worked very well.
Mm-hmm.
That
Absolutely.
That definitely helped it to convey the mood that it was trying to get across. I mean, just visually, for me, I mean, some of the games, I mean, we start seeing things like pre-rendered graphics. I mean, I remember playing like the first 3 Resident Evil games and seeing that like the backgrounds were gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Like every single, because it was played in, it was fixed camera, so every new screen, the pre-rendered 3D backgrounds were absolutely stunning.
Sorry.
The character models, not so much.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think part of the reason Oddworld worked, and part of the reason Survival Horror worked, is because this was the beginning of 3D graphics, and they, like, while they were able to do amazing things we'd never seen before, yes, they were blocky at times. Yes, they looked sort of unnatural. But if you take something where you want shit to look unnatural, that's perfect. That is literally using what you have and making the best out of it. I think some of the scariest zombies in the series, or monsters in the series for Resident Evil, were the first 2 games. And a lot of that is probably just because of they had to make do with their graphics, and the more detailed they were able to do with the graphics in later games, the less horrifying they really were.
That's an interesting take.
So I'd say the same thing for Oddworld as well, where they want this world to feel sort of unnatural to you, an alien. And by doing it in the 3D, you were able to get that pretty well. For a game that took advantage of the 3D in a less unnatural manner, as well as having pre-rendered graphics, we have one of the games that I will unapologetically say does look good on the PlayStation, and that's Final Fantasy IX.
Oh, I was just about to say that. You stole it, but I hard agree.
and the reason why I think we can say this is because Square took the lessons they learned from 7 and 8 in terms of how to use polygons and how to render them, and then kind of finally gave us more full-bodied characters designs for 9.
Yeah, absolutely.
They may be a little spindly noodled in the limbs a little bit, but they still had a lot of character depth and animation to them, where you could see the facial animations, the gesturing, just with the is it sprite work or model work when you say 3D characters? It's model work.
That would be model work.
Yeah.
The modeling was a lot more animated with Final Fantasy IX than it was with 7 or 8.
I mean, 7 and 8 definitely both are important games in their own right in a lot of ways, but I can't think, and nobody can argue that 7 or 8 looks better than 9 graphically without having some thick nostalgia lenses on.
Yeah.
Like, it may not, 9 doesn't need to be your favorite of the 3 games. That is personal preference on gameplay and characters and story, but graphically, 9 blows the others out of the water.
Yeah.
Of course, then it gets blown out of the water by 10 relatively shortly thereafter, but that's a whole nother generation.
Yeah. Which we'll get to. I mean, don't worry. We still have an entire second half to get to, because we are going to be winding down the first half in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
So.
I will say that, again, most of the PlayStation was definitely focusing more on polygons and 3D animations. We still did have some games that did use sprite work.
Symphony of the Night.
Such as Symphony of the Night.
We started with it.
This would be our fighting games as well. That stuck with sprite work because it was easier to update them for the arcades with sprite work than it was to reanimate 3D models.
Street Fighter Alpha. Technically, this would be like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike would be like the most
the one most people are probably familiar with.
Really?
It's the most popular of the Street Fighter 3 titles. From a competitive standpoint.
I mean, true. I mean, I can't really argue that. Usually when I think Street Fighter 3, I'd be thinking Dreamcast.
Yeah. It is on the Dreamcast, but it was on the PlayStation? Wait, maybe not.
I was going to say, it might have been, but that's definitely not. When I think of Street Fighter on the PlayStation, I think of the alphas.
Yeah, so I'm double checking my facts here. So we got Street Fighter Alpha. You got Street Fighter 3 Second Strike, Second Impact.
Okay.
No, that's only Dreamcast only. So yeah, I'm mistaken. I thought it was on the PlayStation. It wasn't. I thought Third Strike was on the PlayStation, but it's not. It's only for PlayStation 2. Well, it's PlayStation 2 and a bunch of other fucking titles because it's Capcom.
Yeah, and we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Like a title that was the PlayStation, that's another fighting game, is Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors.
I was gonna say, don't you skip over? We mentioned, don't you skip over Street Fighter Alpha? That's my favorite. That is my favorite fighting game.
That's fine, and I don't. Everyone's entitled to their opinion.
The graphics are great, and it's where I get Sakura, my beautiful schoolgirl that shoots Hadoukens.
Mm-hmm. But
I'm an anime weeb.
That's fine.
We know. We know, honey.
Yeah, but we had Darkstalkers as well, which is an idea of a quote unquote more mature fighting game than Street Fighter in terms of the sprite works used for the characters. There's a lot more blood being shown, but again, it's still sticking with that anime art style. And then finally, a game that began its title on the PlayStation, but probably is more noteworthy on the PlayStation 2 than the PS3, is Guilty Gear.
Yeah.
So, again, like even back in like '98, like they were still doing sprite work, and it was all very detailed for the time when everyone's pushing for polygons and 3Ds, and Guilty Gear came out and it's like, nope, you can still have some really fantastic looking sprite work if you spend the time on it.
Sprite work is just passé. Like nobody's gonna use sprites anymore.
I mean, pshaw.
When you get to college, they're going to make you write in cursive.
Exactly. And you're never gonna have a calculator on you all the time.
They won't allow it.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah. So we've got a couple minutes here left before we cut to break.
Do we want to talk about Dreamcast then? Because I don't think we're going to have a lot of games to talk about for that.
Well, if we're going to mention Dreamcast briefly, and I do mean briefly, I feel like the one that I remember the most for the Dreamcast, which I also remember being more so because of it being on other consoles and other providers, was Ikaruga.
Ooh.
I have no experience with Ikaruga. I know the name. I don't even... While you're talking, I'm going to look up screenshots.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, I was double checking to make sure. According to Wikipedia, Ikaruga first showed up on arcade,
Dreamcast?
obviously, on Dreamcast.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure you're right. My friend owned a Dreamcast. That's how I played all my Dreamcast stuff. And this is just a game he never had. So I've known nothing but the name.
It came out on the Dreamcast in Japan. It never had a US release until it got ported to the GameCube.
No wonder he didn't have it.
I believe most people's memory of it first is probably going to be in the Xbox 360 store.
Well, hey, it's on Switch if anybody wants to play it.
It's on PC now as well, I think.
Yeah, it's on PC. I've got it on Steam.
I might have it in my Steam library too, if memory serves.
So, yeah, I mean, initially it was first an arcade release, and then Dreamcast release, also Japan only, but then it came over to the US in 2003 on the GameCube.
Yeah, and I feel like Ikaruga is probably around the time we start seeing more of the top-down vertical shoot-'em-up games. Like, they obviously had some very good sprite work in them, but they were mostly relegated to the arcades. Not many of them showed up on the home consoles, which is what we're kind of like focusing on here. I feel like Ikaruga is probably the one most people might be familiar with just because of the cult classic feature to it.
Yeah. And, you know, this was made by Treasure. It was made by the same company who gave us Gunstar Heroes. So...
Mm-hmm. I mean... Lost my train of thought.
If there's other Dreamcast games you guys want to mention, feel free to do so.
I mean, I'm surprised we don't have more to mention, because I feel like the Dreamcast had a lot of beautiful games, and it was kind of the last bastion of sprite games for a while.
Yeah, it was. I mean, unfortunately, my Dreamcast experience is confined to 2 games.
I mean, one just right off the top of my head I want to mention is Jet Set Radio.
Okay.
Any familiarity?
Yes, I have heard of that.
I've heard of it. Aren't you basically like a rebel tagger that spray paints buildings to initiate like the downfall of like some mega corporation?
Yes, it's rad.
I'm just making sure my memory was right. That's all.
No, you're absolutely right. And you fight rival gangs of spray painting taggers. But the game definitely had a very, very defining, unique style and look to the game and aesthetic that was very much its own and was very, I feel, defining of Dreamcast at that point. And, like, it was a game that everybody I know that had a Dreamcast owned that game.
I think most people also probably had Crazy Taxi, but that's for different reasons, and it hasn't aged well.
Yes, absolutely. Another game that I'm surprised you didn't bring up, Ron, is this is where we got Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Yep, this was the first one. Most people I feel are more familiar with it on PS2.
I mean, I think whenever I think of it, I don't know, for most people, maybe you're probably right, but for me, I think of it as a Dreamcast game. Like, it's one of those iconic Dreamcast games that if you have a Dreamcast, you have Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
That's also probably because Dreamcast only has like 50 games. But
it had 240 something before it ended.
And how many of them made the stateside?
No, that was American releases. There was like 600 if you count Japan.
Okay.
There was 242, I think, and I only know that because I was listening to a podcast yesterday where they were talking about the Dreamcast's anniversary and they listed the number of games.
Okay.
And he's gonna defend it to the death, Ron. So
that's fine. No, that's fine. My memory of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is more so tied to the PlayStation 2. So.
Yeah, I mean, it came out 2 years after it released on Dreamcast. So.
Well, as we discussed earlier, it obviously wouldn't be tied to the PS2 for me. I didn't own a PS2 at the time.
Fair enough.
Yeah, remember?
We just talked about this like a couple hours ago. I'm sorry, weeks ago for the people on the podcast.
Time is a relative concept.
I was gonna say, I believe there's some sort of Doctor Who timey-wimey bullshit explanation here.
We are all time travelers here.
This program was pre-recorded.
Before a live studio audience.
All right.
We have also lost all of our early work due to taping over the tapes.
Oh, come on! You really think I'm the BBC? Any more about the Dreamcast before we call the first half here?
I mean, I I think I'm all. I suppose if we're talking Dreamcast, we have one big title we haven't mentioned yet, and that's Shenmue.
We have to.
It's to a lot of people, it was a beautiful game, and even now, looking back on it, I'm amazed at what they were able to do at the time.
But,
I'm not saying it's a good game. I'm saying it's pretty. And I think it still is pretty, and the graphics still hold up amazingly well for a 3D game of its time.
All right.
Ron says reluctantly.
I mean, am I wrong? Like, we were talking about how with PlayStation, which, Dreamcast around the same time, like 3D games were like they were very blocky, they were very polygonal. Like, even when you get into the later stuff, like a lot of it could still look very unnatural. And Shenmue is heads above it. Shenmue looks like it could have been a normal PS2 game rather than a Dreamcast game.
But
you don't like it, and I understand.
Yeah, I just don't like it because it's sometimes it's difficult, listener, to separate your personal feelings from objectively focusing on one aspect of a certain thing.
Yes.
In this case, the graphics of Shenmue may be very good, but my personal hatred for Shenmue is just due to the gameplay, the voice acting, the lines, the dialogue,
everything else.
Luckily, that's not what we're judging at this point.
Yes, but that's what we're judging on, and it's just difficult sometimes to separate those feelings.
Can you separate the art from the artist? All right.
Typically, no. No, I'm not particularly good at that. If an artist is a shitty person, it typically taints their art for me.
Well,
all right. Well,
that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, that's another discussion. I believe, Brian, you have something to say.
Yes, about how we're going to continue this discussion with later consoles on the second half. So, on that fun note, we are going to cut to break. You are listening to us idiots wax nostalgia over very pretty games, despite Ron's objections. We'll see you on the second half. Welcome back to our episode of DLC talking about pretty video games. We ourselves have not become works of art, but that's all right. There's art all around us.
I believe there's a horror movie about that.
So diving back in, we left off with the Dreamcast, and now we're going to shift into N64. And N64, again, I mean, there were definitely games I played for it, and while I think overall N64 games visually may have aged a little bit better than PS1,
they still look kind of bad.
They still kind of do. I mean, the one of the ones that stick out in my head is the first Paper Mario game.
Yeah, and this is, I think, right around the time that was a relatively late N64 title too, if memory serves.
And I just remember Nintendo doing something that was a bit of a unique tactic, because they hadn't made really a major major RPG involving Mario really since Super Nintendo, since the Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. So it had been a while. And
well, you say a while, Super Mario RPG was 1995, I think?
And this was 2000, so...
If 5 years isn't... It's not that long in the grand scheme of things, but it is noteworthy that it's the second RPG with the Mario title attached to it.
Yeah, and just I loved how they decided to... again, they make Mario and all of the characters in that game just made out of paper, just paper thin. And it worked really, really well. I mean, that's just something that Nintendo was not afraid to get experimental with the Mushroom Kingdom.
Well, it's working within the limitations of what they had. I mean, the limitations of the medium. There's a reason that we don't have... There's a reason... before you brought this up, I don't have a single N64 title on my list. There's a reason we're not bringing up Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Or GoldenEye.
Yep. Or frickin' Siphon Filter.
Or Quake 64.
Yeah. Because as good as gameplay might be, they weren't amazing graphically at the time, and they are definitely not amazing graphically now.
Yeah.
But Paper Mario went, okay, these are our limitations. How can we make something that looks wonderful within those limitations? And they took a hard left turn, and it worked.
It absolutely did. Although I'm a little surprised because I'm surprised that none of you are when you're talking about just visually good-looking games. I mean, I thought Rare did pretty well with Conker's Bad Fur Day, which was again right at the end of the N64's cycle.
If I had to list a game, I would probably list Conker's Bad Fur Day. I considered it, but the reason I didn't list it is because I personally don't have experience playing the game. I've just seen shots of it.
Fair. That's fair.
Was there a Star Fox game on the N64?
Yeah, Star Fox 64.
Shows how much I know about the Star Fox series.
Yep. Just if you ask if there's a game, just add 64 to the end of it, and now there is.
I feel like Nintendo was limited with their console for the N64 due to their decision to switch to cartridge-based gaming, which made their games and developing on it prohibitively expensive and much more limiting than its main competitor in the PlayStation.
In its main competitor, I will say with Paper Mario, Paper Mario's aesthetic is very similar to Parappa the Rapper.
Yeah.
So that's
Parappa the
another...
Rapper, Parappa the Rapper might be a bit more construction paper compared to Paper Mario, like stamp-esque quality.
Yes, like there's definitely differences, but like at that point we're talking about the differences between Sonic and Mario as platformers. Like you can still see that they're the same style and aesthetic.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was gonna say, let's move to the PS2.
I was gonna say, we're moving into the 6th generation, so we got PS2, GameCube, and Xbox.
I was gonna say, with the PS2, we have two of the biggest artsy titles that are continually brought up to the modern day in Shadow of the Colossus and Okami.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue anything against it. I mean, you know,
when Deej and I went to go see the Art of Video Games exhibit at the Smithsonian, Okami and Shadow of the Colossus were two of the games represented there.
And there's very solid choices.
I would think probably Metal Gear Solid 3 also holds up.
Yes, that was one of mine. Like,
is that Ronnie sneezing, or was that
cat?
Was
me. That was me hissing.
I was gonna say, is that a cat?
That was Ronnie. I know. I know.
That's my natural response to Metal Gear Solid.
I know, understandable, and I'm mentioning it more so because
it's similar to your response to Shenmue.
I know, and understandable. I get that. And the only reason why I'm mentioning Metal Gear Solid 3 is because Metal Gear Solid 2 still had a lot of the polygon issue, but I feel like Metal Gear Solid 3, so much of that game is focused on the setting of the areas you are, the environment you are walking through, being integral to not only gameplay but the emotions trying to be evoked.
Yeah,
and the end scene, and then the final boss sequence taking place in like a giant flower field with like flower petals flying all around you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that Metal Gear Solid 3 was definitely on my absolutely stunning PS2 games. I also really liked the look of Final Fantasy 12.
Yeah.
It might not be your, again, as Ronnie mentioned earlier, it might not be your favorite game of the Final Fantasy series, but 12 looked beautiful.
My only gripe with 12 was that everyone seems fairly anorexic. Like Vaughn and Vaughn mainly. I always thought Penelo was a little thicker, or she looked a little bit healthier. But Vaughn always looked like this like street kid that looks like 20 pounds too light.
I mean, Bosch definitely looks like he's 20 pounds too light, but part of that's because he was starved for years, so that was a deliberate aesthetic choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. When I think of Final Fantasy PS2 and how good they look, I typically think 10 over 12, but I can't argue with that. 12 definitely looks great. I think the aesthetic of 10 appeals more to me.
I think 10 also uses a larger palette of colors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Than 12 does.
I mean, I just played through 12 for the first time last year completely. I played and dropped it back in the day. So I have a pretty fresh memory of how it looks. And I feel like 10 was more creative in a lot of its designs, and just the colorful aesthetic of this world was way more appealing to me than the desert. And yes, there are things outside of the desert in 12, but it definitely has a very muted palette overall.
Yeah, the desert plays such a very large role in the first like 30 hours of Final Fantasy 12 compared to the first, like even the first 10 hours of Final Fantasy 10. Like you go from a city being a futuristic city being attacked to a beachside resort to a like fantasy city where there's a giant water sphere being held up for a sports ball tournament.
Traveling through the tropics.
Yeah. Traveling through the tropics, going through the mountains, coming across the ruined epics, the ruined cityscape at the far northern edge of the world. Compared to the first 30 hours of Final Fantasy 12 being desert and desert city and caves and desert caves and occasionally the evil empire's Matatech ships, and then more desert.
So we heard you like desert.
I like dessert.
Well, okay, well played. All right.
Funniest part is, I think I prefer 12 to 10, but 10 just looks better.
Again, now you're going into
personal opinion of the rest of the game versus everything else.
Well, that's why I just said.
I know. I'm sorry. I could not help but groan. Sorry.
So we just listen to the two Rons groan at each other. Just that's.
I'm pretty sure that's a Pornhub thing, Brian.
They're both two of my lower rated ones in the series, so saying one is above the other doesn't mean that much.
Fair enough. Any other PS2 games?
I mean, I mentioned Shadow of the Colossus and Okami, and I don't think we really talked about either of them.
I mean, I love the art style of Okami. I mean, you could clearly see the historical inspiration for that artwork.
They wanted to make it look like a painting, and they did an amazing job of bringing to life this old Japanese art style through its graphics. And then Shadow of the Colossus, you go kill giant things. Oh, and it's pretty when you do it. I don't think we really need to talk about or defend Shadow of the Colossus that much. If you're listening to a podcast on the beauty of video game artwork, and you are not already familiar with Shadow of the Colossus, son, educate yourself.
I honestly can't think of any other like visually stunning games from the PS2. I mean, there's Guilty Gear X2 or double XX for sprite-based games in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but again, those are like the outliers now. Is that their sprite work in 2003? What are you, crazy?
Yeah, they were kind of crazy.
Is there a Space Channel 5 the PS2 game, or was that Dreamcast?
What's the game?
Space Channel 5, I believe, is what it's called.
Yeah. Wasn't that? Wait. Wasn't that on Dreamcast?
I thought that was Dreamcast. Am I
PS2, Dreamcast, Game Boy Advance?
That was was it a Dreamcast exclusive that was brought over later? Because I swear that was an exclusive.
Dreamcast. It was not. Dreamcast released in North America June 2000. PS2 released November 2003.
Okay.
So yes, it was on Dreamcast. It was 3 years on Dreamcast before it came over to PS2.
I think the only reason why I'm mentioning it is just because it was like the first game I could think of when I thought of like 3D anime-esque art style, which was a trend we would see carry over more in PS2 with Persona and the dot hack games.
Well, Persona is PS2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. We're back talking about Dreamcast.
Yeah.
You step back a bit to Dreamcast.
Yeah,
land.
sure. Yeah. But I honestly can't think of any other like visually stunning PS2 games.
All right.
Can any of you?
What?
Can any of you?
Those were the Metal Gear Solid 3 and Final Fantasy 12 were the two that stuck out in my brain. And I'm going purely off of memory.
And all I had listed for PS2 was Shadow of the Colossus and Okami.
Yep. So, GameCube then. GameCube.
Okay, we're done.
Yep.
Luigi's Mansion looked like $1 million at the time.
Well, GameCube had Twilight Princess, right?
Yes.
I think Twilight Princess holds up pretty well.
It does. There's a reason it was my favorite Zelda game for a long time, and part of that was the graphics.
It was very and especially graphically. I mean, there was a lot. I love when graphic choices, graphic design in a game are deliberately meant to evoke a mood or a set of emotions. I love when it does things like that.
I think a lot of the games that we've listed do that, and I think that's part of why they stick with us so much. Is the graphics aren't just a thing that you move through or you move with. The graphics are literally there to express the mood that the gameplay is also trying to tell you. All of these things are coming together to try to make you feel a certain way.
So I had Twilight Princess, and that was I mean, I loved just the contrast between, the Twilight realm and the Day realm.
So we brought up Twilight Princess before we brought up Wind Waker on the GameCube.
A game that was controversial because of its graphic choices.
And its graphic choices have held up better over time than any other Zelda game.
Okay.
Addendum. A slight addendum to that. Slight asterisk. The asterisk being any 3D Zelda.
I just missed like the last 15 seconds of what you guys said because my headphones came on hooked.
So
I missed everything you guys said after what I said.
Yeah, so Brian and I both made a kerfuffle noise, and I chimed in with the addendum. Any 3D Zelda?
No, I will say, I think that I'm not saying that as a game it holds up better than any Zelda, but graphically, I think if you put Wind Waker in front of somebody who's never played a Zelda game before and has no nostalgia towards it, it will be more appealing to them than any other Zelda game before that, and even some of the more modern ones.
I'm curious as to your reasons why.
Because the cel-shaded, kind of cartoony art style seems timeless, while anything earlier than that, first of all, for 3D, we can agree, anything earlier than that just feels dated. But going back into the pixel art, like, the Zelda 1 and 2, you gotta have a lot of imagination there, and I didn't know what some of those monsters were really supposed to look like if I didn't have the manual. And even up to Link's Awakening and Link to the Past, I still think that Wind Waker's art style is more appealing than that. And I love that game. I love most of those games more than Wind Waker. Wind Waker is not one of my favorite Zeldas, but I think Wind Waker graphically is the one that has held up the best over time and will continue to hold up the best over time.
I don't think I agree with you. I understand where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
My personal opinion is, I think until Breath of the Wild came out, I would have agree with you, but I think Breath of the Wild takes that idea you said about cel-shaded graphics and like carries it a one step further.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I said held up better than the more modern ones, but I can't really judge how it's going to hold up to Breath of the Wild until we're a generation away from Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
But I can absolutely see the argument there, because Breath of the Wild looks amazing as well. So I could see Breath of the Wild taking that from it, but that still makes Wind Waker number 2. Like, that's not a bad place to be.
I would. My personal opinion is I probably would have placed Twilight Princess above Wind Waker in terms of graphical aesthetic. But that's my personal opinion, because until Breath of the Wild came out, Twilight Princess was my favorite Legend of Zelda game.
I was going to say, my favorite Legend of Zelda game were our Link Between Worlds number 1, Twilight Princess number 2, Breath of the Wild number 3.
Yeah, for me, it's Breath of the Wild, Twilight Princess, Link to the Past.
I love Twilight Princess, and I love the aesthetic. That aesthetic appeals to me on a very personal level. But you know as well as I do that the aesthetic of Twilight Princess has been divisive in the community. There are a lot of people who think that it is too dark, that the same complaint we had with Final Fantasy XII, that it doesn't use enough of the color palette. It doesn't jump the way that Zelda games typically did before that. Like, pretty much every Zelda game was bright, even if it had dark places. And for, like, as much as there were issues when it first came out, at this point, pretty much anyone who looks back on Wind Waker looks back on the graphics positive. And I can't say that's true of Twilight Princess.
I will mention, too, that of the 2 GameCube Legends of Zeldas, Wind Waker did see an HD remake.
Yes.
Which
So did Twilight Princess.
Did Twilight Princess?
Wii U, yep. It had an HD remake on the Wii U.
I know Wind Waker had an HD remake on the Wii U, but I didn't think it had one for Twilight Princess as well.
It did. Take a look. Look it up now. I just Googled it to make sure I'm wrong. Twilight Princess HD. I've been waiting for them to port the 2 of those games to the goddamn Switch so I can get my HD releases.
Yeah, all right. I just remember Wind Waker HD more than I do Twilight Princess HD for some reason.
Twilight Princess HD didn't make as big of a splash as Wind Waker did, and I think that's because a lot of people played Twilight Princess at the time. Meanwhile, there is a whole bunch of people that refused to play Wind Waker because of the graphics, that were now going back and playing it, so you heard a lot more of people talking about it.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Other GameCube games that are...
I have one.
Go ahead.
Resident Evil 4.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way as Ron. Graphically, it to me, I'm coming at this from outside. I have never played Resident Evil 4. It is one of the 2 Resident Evil games I have never touched. And that's 4 and 6. But everything I've seen about it doesn't amaze me for the time it was out. It's not that it looks bad. but it doesn't stick with me. But that might just be because I didn't play it, so I can't see the animation and get invested the way somebody who played it did.
That's quite all right. This is personal opinion. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fine. And I would respectfully disagree because I feel Resident Evil as a genre until probably up until Resident Evil 2's remake. They forced themselves to use a limited color palette for the horror genre of what the game's trying to be, and I feel like with Resident Evil 4, the color palette got reduced even more to a lot of muddied browns and grays,
and that was the point. That's the thing. It's trying to evoke a setting, and it does it really well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I can understand that.
I mean, Ron, you know it just as well as I do. How color theory and all of that nonsense. How you use a sparse palette can evoke a very specific mood, and I think Resident Evil 4 did that very well.
I guess was Tales of Symphonia GameCube?
There was a
first?
Tales of Game on GameCube. I don't play the series, so I don't know which one it was.
I think it was Tales of Symphonia.
Probably. That is the big hole in my RPG knowledge of I've never played a Tales of game.
I've not played many of them either, but
Symphonia was GameCube.
All right, I just remember the Tales of game taking off with the GameCube version and having it be due to almost solely to Tales of Symphonia. And I believe the art style in that does hold up. It is a anime-esque art style, if memory serves.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it still holds up relatively well to this day. Do not quote me on that. I have not played that game in a decade.
Since 2004?
Yeah.
2003 is what it's saying to be.
Japan,
or is that the North American release 2004? Japanese 2003.
Yeah.
And then a worldwide release for PC in 2016. So
I feel like there's one more GameCube game that was really good graphically, and I can't remember what it was.
Obviously,
we haven't brought up Mario Sunshine. Maybe that was intentional.
Thousand Year Door was...
That was GameCube as well. That was...
Yep.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't say any of the Metroid Prime games because polygons. Just still so many polygons.
Because polygons.
Yeah, I as much as I love the gameplay of the Prime series, and as much as I wish Nintendo would do more with fucking Samus, and as much as I'm praying and hoping that Prime 4 is a good game, I can't say the Prime or Echoes are good graphically.
Okay. I've never played a single one, so I'll take your word for it. I will take your word for it. And much as I can't say a single thing about the original Xbox.
I can't either. The Xbox is like the one console that I give two shits about. And it's like, okay, you're mainly Halo and Forza. And that's not like Forza. Yes, it looks like it. Generally speaking, Forzas are visually stunning because they're trying to sell you on the car, and the car being like liquid sex.
That and Gran Turismo. I mean, both.
Yeah, but Gran Turismo is the one I remember more than Forza. But considering we haven't seen a Gran Turismo game in about 87 years,
Well, I don't know if they need to at this point. So,
At this point, I feel like Forza's kind of cemented their stake in the liquid sex car game.
Fair enough. So, I mean, I unfortunately have nothing on my own list for Xbox because that was just a complete... And, and then we start getting into the 7th generation, which is the 360, the PS3.
Well, are we going to skip the Nintendo DS?
I would say the DS is like the nebulous PS2, PS3, Xbox 360 era.
I mean, it came out during the PS2 era, so I would have put it in there.
Fair enough.
If you have DS games, you want to...
I mean, Brian, you should know what one of them is going to be, because I can already guess what it is.
I know you. I'm going to let you guess, Ron, but I'm 99% certain you are correct. I'm going to see if Brian can.
DS? Yeah, we're just talking regular Nintendo DS.
Yeah, plain old DS.
Oh, Jesus Christ! It's been so long. I mean, I would probably guess The World Ends With You.
Yeah.
There you go. Hey, The World Ends With You looks great. Like, I'm not just bringing it up because it's one of my favorite games. I'm bringing it up because, holy crap, that sprite work.
I am curious because I did get it as a Christmas. I did get the Switch remake for Christmas, so I am curious to see how that plays out.
I feel like we haven't really mentioned Game Boy Color, or Game Gear, because up to this point in time, by and large, they were just like worse versions of the earlier generation console games.
And DS is the first time that it feels like they were finally able to stand on their own alongside the current generation stuff.
A bit. There were a handful of Game Boy Advance games.
Well, I feel like DS... I would agree. Game Boy Advance at least starts it. But I would say DS is really when, like, this is where the sprite-based stuff that we would have seen on earlier consoles went, because they're not getting supported on the current system.
Yeah. So, for me specifically, what I'm saying for Game Boy Advance and DS, the things I'm thinking of are Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. We have Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2. We also have the re-release of and the updates for Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver.
Yeah. And can we not talk about Advance 2? It'll just make me sad.
From a graphical standpoint, you can't argue that the sprite work in that game is gorgeous.
I can't, but it reminds me of
everything else wrong with that game.
It reminds me of how it stole frickin' tens of hours of my life that I'll never get back. That I didn't enjoy giving to it.
I am. I'm trying to look at my DS catalog here for other graphically amazing like games for it. There's you have Mega Man. I think it's XY.
I haven't
ZX,
played the XY ones.
It's or XY or ZX or something like that.
It's ZX.
Yeah, that's another visually like amazing sprite work for that game. Similar as well. The Mega Man Zero series.
I mean, I would say the Golden Sun games.
Yeah, but those are both Game Boy Advance specifically.
Yep.
Order of Ecclesia for the DS as well.
I mean, if I'm gonna go with a mobile Castlevania, I'm gonna go with one of the ones with Soma Cruz. Those ones looked great.
Fine.
Am I wrong? That's the thing. When Ron goes, "Oh, fine," Yes, you have a point. I just don't want to admit it.
I just don't like Soma as a character.
That's fine. He's not a likable character.
That's my main gripe with it. That's all. There's another DS. I think DS, when we start seeing the Mario and Luigi games start being really popular. I know there was at least one. I think there was a Mario and Luigi RPG for the Game Boy Advance.
I don't know. I know, like, to me, that always was a DS thing. There might have been one for the Advance, but if there is, I don't know it.
Brian, can you double check for me, please? I think it's just like Mario. I think it's just like a little like Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga.
Superstar Saga, yep, was Game Boy Advance, 2003.
Okay,
and then everything else was DS or above.
Yeah, and then we have Minish Cap for Legend of Zelda is DS as well, I believe.
Minish Cap, yeah. Minish Cap wasn't DS. Minish Cap was Advanced.
Okay, I thought it was DS. My mistake.
Yeah,
I think I played on D. I think I played it through the DS.
DS plays advanced games.
Yeah, I think I played it through that.
When you're talking about them, they're basically one library.
Yeah. I think that's most of the titles I can think of that are like visually stunning from a DS standpoint.
All right.
Can you think of any, Ronnie? Or
you've nailed all the ones I would name. The problem is the DS and advanced libraries are so goddamn large that we're gonna forget something.
Yeah,
we just are.
And to be fair, part of the reason too is like a lot of the DS stuff is ports or remasterings or re-editings of older games for the current generation of handheld games.
So, I mean, at this point, I am ready to just start diving into, the previous and current generations. I mean, we got the 360, the PS3, the Wii, and then our current generation. And, oh, by the way, I've got some indie titles to throw at. So
I was going to say, oh, by the way, we have literally the entire Steam library we can throw out.
So,
yeah, but I feel like it's at this point in time with the PS3, the 360, the Wii, that we start seeing the first inklings of nostalgia going like, hey, you remember all those sprite games we played as kids? Can we still do that? Can we still push that as a genre and have it, or as an art style and not just a graphical limitation of what the console or handheld is forcing us to do? So things like Castle Crashers.
Yeah.
Bastion.
Such.
I was gonna say, I would list if we're talking about indie ones, Bez.
Yeah. My personal up to this point, I have not played the most newest one, but of the Supergiants. It is Supergiant that does like they did Bastion, Transistor, or Pyre, right?
You are correct. Yes.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Of the, because they've got Hades currently in
early access.
Mm-hmm.
But of those four, I think the one I like the most from a graphical standpoint is Transistor.
Oh, absolutely. I have a picture of Transistor on my goddamn wall. That game is gorgeous.
I will absolutely give you Transistor. That is such a stunning piece of work.
I love that game.
For PS3 games, there was a Castlevania multiplayer game. I think Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, I believe it's called.
That doesn't sound right. Because I don't remember playing Castlevania multiplayer game, and I think I played Harmony of Dissonance.
Double check for me. It is a Castlevania game where the concept of it is
Harmony of Dissonance is Wii U and Game Boy Advance.
I'm forgetting the exact. I know it's a Castlevania game, but the concept of it was basically you are playing. You are a NPC who is reading through a cursed book, talking about the analogies and the stories of all the prior Castlevanias and the heroes who have fought the various like famous monsters from those genres.
Is that the fighting game?
No.
That sounds like the fighting game.
No, it's a multiplayer. Like you would play it with like you were playing as Alucard or Soma or Shinoa or Maria.
Do you remember which system it was on?
I remember being a DLC game for PS3.
Okay, I'm looking at the whole Castlevania series right now, trying to find it.
Harmony of Despair or something like that.
Well, while he's looking that up, if you're talking PS3/Xbox 360 games, there are a few that spring to my mind out of personal experience. The first being BioShock.
Yep.
And I'll also throw in BioShock Infinite in that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I will throw a shout out to Skyrim.
I'm not saying that you imagined it, but the only things I can find for those systems are Lords of Shadow and their sequels.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to start looking now.
Sorry, I tried.
So,
I know. Well, okay. Here's the reason. I know I played it. I know it was for the PS3 because I played it with my friend, and he's also a very big Castlevania fan.
Well, again, while you're looking that up, so I've mentioned BioShock, I've mentioned Skyrim.
Well, but Brian, can I interrupt you for a second?
I mean, go right ahead.
Well, just because I brought up a game and then we moved it on immediately, and I had no chance to talk about it.
Okay.
And that was Fez. When we were talking about the indie titles. Are you familiar with Fez, Brian?
In name only.
Okay, well, 1 second. There we are. I thought that might be the case. I am just sending you a little GIF in the chat. Just click on that, and that's what I'm going to be talking about.
All right. Like I said, I'm familiar with it. I've seen images of it, but I've never played it.
The reason I'm bringing it up is because it is the first, not the first, but it is one of the primary titles where the art and aesthetic directly impact the gameplay. Where this is a game where you were seeing this entire thing like it's a 2D world, but then you can rotate the actual 3D world. And then now that 3D world is now flat again.
That reminds me similarly of that type of mechanic in Super Paper Mario for the Wii. This expands upon that a lot further.
Yeah. So, like, I highly, highly recommend Fez. It is one of my top 10 favorite games of all time. I love the game, but I think it's important to bring up in this context because the art and the art of the game is a direct gameplay element.
Yes, it is. I can tell that right from the GIF.
And that's like that is a very important thing, as we'll see, because this is something that many indie games end up toying around with. But Fez really, and I'll be bringing up one later on that does as well, but Fez was really the one who made that a mainstream concept. And it looks great in a very simplistic art style.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing we've touched on, how on detailed art styles and how that can make games look great, and how we increase in detail and we increase all the stuff. But there is a beauty in simplicity as well. in being able to take a concept and bring it down to its most basic things, but still being able to express that super clearly.
No argument here.
So
okay. I did find it. I posted in the general chat. For those who are listening, it's Harmony of Despair.
Okay.
Other PS3 games I remember being.
Oh, hey, I see Soma Cruz on the cover. Ron.
As I was saying, other games that are visually stunning. The Last of Us was originally a PS3 game, and it pushed the system to its goddamn limit and arguably run better on the PS4. But
it's a PS3 game and a PS4 game and probably a PS5 game.
Yeah.
Give it time.
Yeah. Batman Arkham Asylum is also, I think, visually accurate for the genre of what it's trying to convey.
I will agree with you there. What did I say? I said BioShock, I said Skyrim personally, and one other game for me, and it's a game I profoundly dislike, but it's gorgeous. Final Fantasy 13.
Profoundly dislike.
I mean, it is Hallway Simulator for about 25 hours.
Oh, yeah, that's what I said. I do not like Final Fantasy 13. I have made no secret of that, but it looks gorgeous.
That seems to be a trend in Final Fantasies for a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
Dead Space is another genre. Of all the horror titles, for some reason, Dead Space was the one that I did not make me run away in absolute abject horror.
Great series. Even if by the third game it started to feel a little tired. But yes, that was also wonderfully done.
I say, coming from an anime fan, I have to bring up Ni no Kuni was PS3. And that game looks great, as you would expect with designs from Studio Ghibli.
I was going to say, I'm like, do you expect nothing less from a...
I expect nothing less.
As much as I hate to admit this, Mass Effect 3 is also still pretty damn impressive from a visual perspective.
That's all right. Like I said, I just brought up a game that I absolutely loathe. That's fine. Whereas I love Mass Effect 3, and so
I
know.
I believe my opinions on Mass Effect 3 have been stated.
Yes.
Although at this point in time, I believe it's been past one presidency and maybe two by the time this recording airs.
Ron is able to appreciate the beauty of a game that he dislikes. I believe we have watched character growth over the course of this podcast.
Of this Injustice episode.
I'm poking you. I'm just poking you, Ron.
I know.
It's out of love.
It's just BioWare, just as a company, has frustrated me since Mass Effect 3.
I know.
They have gone down the spiral that is the toilet of the video game industry.
I know. So you've had words.
So we haven't really touched on the Wii yet.
We had the re-release of Okami. We had Tatsunoko vs. Capcom for the Wii.
I was going to say, I would bring up what I think is probably one of the best examples of pure animation in the industry with Punch-Out for the Wii.
Yes, the return of the subtle tells in a boxing simulator.
Yeah, but it has some of the best animation, hands down, in any video game I've ever seen. Which you need in a game that's based around reading tells and body language.
Yeah. I will say, I do believe Metroid Prime 3 does hold up. It's still a little rough around the edges compared to more modern games, but I do think Prime 3 of the Prime games at this point does hold up relatively well.
And going back to Ronnie's point about game graphics being a core gameplay element, Kirby's Epic Yarn.
Yeah.
You also have Super Paper Mario as well.
Yep. I mean, I can't play more than like half an hour of Kirby's Epic Yarn without just breaking down and losing control of the English language because of how cute and precious this game is.
Yeah. We also have No More Heroes for the Wii. And that's just like a game that basically like oozes
that is a game
style.
that is all style.
Yeah, that's a game that is just focuses on style in a degree not seen since Devil May Cry, which sort of makes sense because I believe it's Capcom publishing, Ninja Theory developing.
That sounds right.
Grasshopper Manufacturer is a developer and published by Marvelous Entertainment, Ubisoft, and Rising Star Games, according to Wikipedia.
So we were both wrong.
Yes.
Very wrong. Please forgive us.
Yeah.
But that game is one that thrives on its style to the point that it is nearly style over substance, but it pulls it off so well that no one complains.
Yeah.
I have a smaller title to bring up. It's about the same time period, but it's on a platform we have not discussed yet, and that is mobile, Android and iOS. And that is Monument Valley. If either of you two have ever heard of that.
Heard of, never played.
It is a very surreal game where you play as this very, very simply drawn princess going through this whole area that is right out of an M.C. Escher painting. And the whole game is basically taking advantage of visual trickery as you would see in literal M.C. Escher paintings and actually using that for gameplay. So once again, it is a game that is taking advantage of the art style, the artwork as a primary gameplay element. At
the end of the Wii's life cycle, we had Xenoblade Chronicles.
Yeah, we did.
Great game.
Long game. Fucking long game.
Do you expect anything else out of a Xeno game?
No, but I believe my playtime on that was like 110 hours. I don't think I beat it.
Though those are beginner's numbers. You tell me when you hit 180 hours. You talk to me about Breath of the Wild.
Have you seen my playtime of fucking Path of Exile?
Well, let's take a look at my playtime in Factorio. I'm not even sure if I want to see
7,000 years. All right.
I think it's 800 hours.
Yeah, those are whip numbers here. Let me pull my Path of Exile playtime numbers. 3,051.
I mean, if we really want to pull out numbers, we'll go into MMOs.
I was going to say, can we veer away from the cock contest for a second?
Yeah, we can.
Well,
we can. At this point in time, I think like 3DS as well, so we can start mentioning Bravely Default and Bravely Second. Persona Q and PQ2.
Here's the funny part. I love the art style to the Bravely Default games, but I literally do not have them on this list because I feel like they are so blown out of the water by Octopath Traveler that is the modern RPG
but
I'm bringing up.
Fucking like that's basically like saying like comparing like the Mona Lisa to the Sistine Chapel, where it's just like yes, they're both visually stunning, but for wildly different reasons.
Point. I love the Bravely Default, and I absolutely think it is beautiful, so we can absolutely bring it up. That's just, like, I didn't want to bring up do too many things, so I was trying to to do very distinct things, so that's why I hadn't brought that one up. And I can't wait for Default 2. I think it's a terrible title, but I can't wait for it.
It's a terrible naming title, considering we had Bravely Second, which is technically Bravely Default 2.
Yeah, I've been arguing that, and my friends are like, well, no, because Bravely Second was a direct sequel to Bravely Default, and Bravely Default 2 is going to have a new cast, so it's like how Final Fantasies aren't necessarily connected. And I'm like, no, you were arguing Final Fantasy bullshit to explain why it's okay to do that with another franchise. No, it wasn't okay for Final Fantasy to do it. We just accept it because they've done it for so long. It's not okay for them to keep doing it. Learn how to name things. Learn from Sony. They do it well. Don't learn from Xbox. It'll only lead to sadness.
Bravely Default is Square, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You're talking about a company who names their main series games so badly. I mean, see Kingdom Hearts.
At this point, I feel like they're leaning into the joke.
Yeah, at this point in time, they're leaning into it more than anything else.
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean
it's deliberate now.
So
it was not deliberate originally.
Doesn't mean they're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are starting...
2.8 final chapter prologue. Anyone?
Oh, good lord, we're starting to run out of time here. So
yeah.
Okay, let's. How many games each you got left? I got 5.
Yeah, I've got 4.
Why don't we each? Ron, why don't you start, and we'll just go down what games you have left, and we'll each just do that.
All right.
Lightning round.
Lightning round.
Well, no, I mean we can discuss it, but I just mean go through your titles before I bring up anything for Brian does, so we make sure we each get through our stuff.
So I'm combining these because they are both visually stunning for the same reason, although they are both different games entirely. Crypt of the Necrodancer and Cadence of Hyrule.
Oh, Cadence of Hyrule. Yeah, it looks great.
So that like those are both combined, but again, that is a game that is designed that uses sprite work in conjunction with gameplay elements to look visually stunning. So Brian?
It's a game that I've mentioned a ton here on downloadable content, Ori and the Blind Forest.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, you did.
It looks great. I just have not played it, so I don't have an opinion.
And I'm sure you also have Hollow Knight on that list.
I have Hollow Knight, so
you have Hollow Knight. Another game which I thought gameplay was meh, but beautiful. Game was beautiful. Gianna's Sister's Twisted Dreams.
I almost put that on this list, and I recommended that to you. It was one of my failures.
This was not as much of a failure as Undertale. I thought it was meh. I didn't...
I didn't realize how hard it got, because I was still playing it when I recommended it to you. I did not understand how hard it got later on. Which I remember being your primary complaint. At the time. I don't know how you feel now.
Yeah, the difficulty spike was just... Oh, God, that was...
Yeah, when I recommended it to you, I hadn't hit the spike yet.
So
but the game looked great, and I loved the mechanics early.
Yeah, and it, beautiful.
Yeah. So, what do you have, Ronnie?
Okay. Well, I have Child of Light for the PC, a PC RPG that was made to look like it came out of a children's fairy tale.
God, one of the more underrated Ubisoft games.
Thank you. I was worried nobody was going to know what I was talking about. Isn't it gorgeous?
It is. I love that game, and I was kind of pissed that Ubisoft just kind of very, very quietly just slipped that game out, like no real press or anything like that.
They've teased now with the Switch port of it. They have teased a sequel.
To kind of speed this along, another shotgunning of a couple. I have the Messenger.
Okay, I can see that. That basically modern day Ninja Gaiden.
Ninja Gaiden with some minor Metroidvania aspects to it.
It's a game that is a game I regret. It was a game that was up on limited run games, but it was a tough month, so I did not pick it up, and I kind of regret that now.
If you have the Xbox Game Pass through your PC, you can play it through that. That's how I played it. Okay.
I can get it in other ways. I like having a physical copy of games that I play.
Yeah, that's understandable. Another one which I feel like we should mention because this game is unabashedly hard, but it's sold entirely on its graphics. Cuphead.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh,
that had to get brought up.
Taking its inspiration from the 1940s Max Fleischer cartoons. I will absolutely give you that.
Right alongside that, here's one that wasn't on my list, but now I have to mention it, is Epic Mickey. Epic Mickey looked great. If either of you two ever played it.
I never did, but I remember seeing a lot of promotional material for it.
Yeah, it's a lot of promotional material for it, and I know it. If memory serves, when it was reviewed well for the graphics, but was panned for the gameplay decisions.
I think you're thinking... I could be wrong. I think you're thinking of the second one, because I believe the first one was pretty well received. The second one was the one that got panned for a lot of things.
I could be thinking of two. I'm not. It's been a while since I've devoted any sort of thought process to the megalomaniacal Disney conglomerate.
Both of them are graphically very, very solid. They definitely seek to emulate the older style of Disney cartoons.
Yep.
And they do it very well. Mm-hmm. And it was the return of Oswald the Rabbit. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit.
All right. Do you have any more, Ronnie?
Yes, I have a couple more.
Go ahead.
So first, I have Splatoon, which, when we're talking about games that pop and games that use their color palette to the utmost, I think Splatoon is the very top of that list.
I'm not going to argue with that.
Yeah, I guess. All right, yeah.
I was going to say, it has a... Like, whether you like the art style or not, it has a very strong style, and it tells that style in every way. And that style is 90s Nickelodeon, basically.
Yeah, it's like slime everywhere.
Yeah, the only thing that game is missing is Mark Summers.
Do you guys want me to keep going, or do you guys have more ones as well?
Yeah, I wrote down a list of. I've got 6 more.
Okay, so yeah,
Brian,
we'll just keep going around.
Yeah, Brian.
All right, we'll go back to me. We mentioned, indie games getting on the nostalgia train. Shovel Knight.
Yeah,
that was one of mine. So yeah,
Shovel Knight's. That has such good sprite work.
It has such good sprite work, and it uses colors that were not part of the NES, that was not part of the NES, that the NES couldn't recreate. But if you don't know that, you can't tell.
It feels NES.
Yes.
And the, surprisingly, with all of the different nights, I'll actually compare this a lot to Mega Man, where they would take a theme for a boss and lean into that theme 1,000%. And it made such unique designs. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the Mega Mans, they weren't always good designs, but they were certainly unique.
Yeah. Any others, Brian?
No, that was it for me. Okay.
So I'm going to check on another 2 here. I have Axiom Verge and Darkest Dungeon.
Axiom Verge, that's the original NES Metroid taken to 11.
Yeah.
Just art style wise.
Yeah, from an art style perspective, yes. And clearly they did not limit themselves to the NES palette alone, but they definitely limited themselves to that art style and that aesthetic of a lot of pixels and a lot of subtle changes to convey depth or shade.
Darkest Dungeon, I will happily give you. That almost made my list. That art style is so good. I mean, it's my lock screen on my phone.
Yeah, and most people, I feel, know Darkest Dungeon more so due to the unabashed difficulty of it and the narrator voice. But that art style does require... You cannot have that game convey the emotions that it does without that art style.
There can be no hope in this hell. No hope at all.
Yeah. Any more from you, Ronnie?
Yeah, I still have 4.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll throw out Persona 5.
Yep.
For the
I
PS4.
will agree with that wholeheartedly.
Like that I will say, similar to one of the other games, that is a game that just looking at it, I would think is style over substance. But holy shit, does that game have a lot of substance to it too?
It is also an idea of the... Just from the menu design, just like the pause menu, basically, just that pause menu just oozes style.
Yeah, they put their style into every corner of that game. And one thing I'll bring up for it is, I like how they do how solidly they ground the real world, as opposed to how creative and imaginative they were able to get with the dream worlds, with the worlds inside of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're able to see nearly you're able to see a completely different style in each of the different characters' worlds.
So to briefly explain to Brian, as I don't know if he knows too much about Persona 5 specifically.
No, not outside the way you and Ronnie get very excited talking about it.
All right. So it is a JRPG. It is wholeheartedly a JRPG.
Unashamedly.
Yeah, unashamedly. It is set in a modern era, sometimes quite literally like 2015, 2016, 2017-esque technology. Real world set in for Persona 5 specifically, it's set in Tokyo.
Yes, it is.
It's a subsection of Tokyo, which is an actual subset, I believe, if memory serves.
I really wish I could remember the name of it, because I used to know
Shinjuku?
the name of it. It might be Shinjuku.
It was someone he used to know.
You can go to Shinjuku. No.
Yeah,
you can go to Shinjuku in it.
Yeah. But anyway, it is set in like the real world as an example, but through a twist of fate, you are able to explore the quote unquote inner heart of a person's emotions, and usually this leads to a lot of twisted emotions of usually tied to one of the 7 deadly sins.
They target. Once they find they have the ability to do this, they target corrupt people who are very twisted, who are
like abusing their power,
abusing their power, abusing the people around them, and they go in to literally destroy their twisted desires and force them to confess their crimes. It is all, and all the characters, because they have to face their own inner demons to be able to get their power,
literally and figuratively.
Yes, and that is a theme of looking inward and examining who you are and what you are, and like all of that is a very strong theme in all of the work.
Yeah.
Also, you can date your teacher, and it's very inappropriate.
Oh, Japan.
Yeah. The reason why it's so popular as it is too, it is also the concept of like discovering who you are as a person in those formative years of your teenage years, as every character is a teenager, and that is a deliberate story choice.
Brian, I know you have all the free time in the world, and you should go and play this game right now.
Oh yes, absolutely, lots.
I will say, once P5 Royal does come out, you should play P5 Royal.
Yeah. They're second, third, and fourth tier.
Yeah. So, to continue on, because we're trying to end this quickly, I will say I have two more: Celeste and Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon.
Celeste, which I am about to start. So
yeah. Celeste is on my list, so I will cut that out.
Yeah. Celeste for the SNES quality, I would say.
Yeah, they're going with an SNES look.
And definitely using a similar color palette as what the SNES could do. And just like cranking that to 11. And then Bloodstained is going back to the NES Castlevania art style.
I have argued that Bloodstained Curse of the Moon is the best NES Castlevania ever published.
I mean, that's like only like 4 games. It's not that hard to argue. Unfortunately, I can't say the actual Bloodstained title is graphically good.
I think the Bloodstained title is graphically great, but unfortunately, the issues in their animation and in their loading and in everything else prevents me from putting it on this list. But I can definitely point at individual assets and go, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is unfortunately a case of some of it looks great, some of it not so much.
I mean, keep in mind, I played it on the Switch, so I played the worst version of it.
Yeah, I played it on PC. I played Bloodstained Ritual of the Night on the PC. So
yeah, I got it on the Switch, and I do not regret it, and I do not regret playing it. I really enjoyed the game, but yeah.
Yeah. So Brian, do you have any more or no?
I actually had one that I skipped over.
Okay, go ahead.
The indie game Journey.
Yeah, that's PS3. Yeah, that totally fits.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, that's another game that was at the Art of Video Games.
Not surprised.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say, there's like the art is the game. Like that, it is just a piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I will finish up because I only have one game left on my list, and then we can go through the last 3 of Ronnie's.
The last 2, because Celeste was one of them.
Okay. So last game for me is Guilty Gear Xrd Sign through Rev 2. Like that entire, basically, titles series, because they basically updated the game through DLC.
Mm-hmm.
It's another fighting game. It's another anime-looking thing, but Brian...
Say that like it's a bad thing.
I know, I shouldn't, but like, Brian... The challenge that the Guilty Gear genre as a fighting game took, like of how to update their games to look and run good at 720p and 1080p, was a challenge that the dev team had to tackle, and how they solved it is a technical marvel to have it look as good as it does.
Nice.
Like, no joke, they basically had to... It's Unreal Engine 3 and then Unreal Engine 4, I believe, to update the game, basically. But they make 3D sprites look 2D. Like, I would say to you, pull up the YouTube reveal for Guilty Gear Sign, and just think that this is rendered in 3D, and you're playing a 2D fighter on it.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's the last game. That was the last game on my list.
Well, I have 2 games left. The first is what I would say the most beautiful, the most beautiful sprite game of all time at this point, which to me is Octopath Traveler. Say whatever you'd like about any of the other decisions they made in gameplay or anything else. That game takes the NES era of RPGs as a base, and then goes, what would have happened if we evolved this for the last 20 years rather than just going 3D? And spits out the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen. Octopath Traveler is... I don't have words for how beautiful that game is.
I cannot wait to start that. That was another one that I got for Christmas, was Octopath Traveler. So, it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Ron?
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I'm A-okay with that.
Okay.
Like, come on, Square. You had this gigantic, beautiful engine. You know what to do with it. We told you how to use it.
They're doing a sequel.
They're doing a sequel to it, but we started the podcast with a certain game. That you can end the podcast with them announcing this game, please.
And then another one I'd like to mention is Hollow Knight, which kind of encapsulates a lot of things that I talked about earlier in games, where it has such a strong atmosphere that it brings out through its art style, through its color choices, through the set designs, and then such unique sprite work for each of the enemies and the characters, and how expressive they can be through masks. And just Hollow Knight is one of those games where I couldn't see them doing doing an updated re-release in 20 years and having them do anything that would make it look better than it does right now.
Yeah.
That game is so strong in its artwork, and that is a huge part of what sells that game. Brian, I know you've played the game. Thoughts?
God, I can't wait for Silk Song. That game, I want more.
So do I, and I can't wait for Silk Song either. God, it looks good.
I'm just, that game was so, talk about setting a mood.
Yeah, and they followed through with that mood from beginning to end. Like, that game knew what it was trying to tell you, and it just told that story. It didn't get lost in anything. It didn't lose its focus. It just honed in. This is the world, the story, and the characters we're trying to give to you, and you just go along for that ride.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I'm excited for the Ori sequel. Oh, it's once those games come out, it's like, all right, well, you're not going to see me. Guys, we put together a gigantically solid list here. So, well done, everybody. Well done, everybody, on that one. So, I'm curious about what the listeners will think, though, because I am sure we left out plenty of games. Like, why didn't you put in Clay Fighter from the Genesis? Or something like that. But if you...
Primal Rage is the rage, you know.
Oh God.
All the rage.
Oh, God. I wish I could go through the Ethernet cable and garrote you for that. But it's... So, I love you, too. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments on this episode or any other episode of Downloadable Content, you can let us know on our website, dlcpodcast.com. Click the feedback button. Let us have it. You can also go on Facebook at Downloadable Content or on Twitter at DL Content. Every single episode can also be found not only on the website, but on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. So it is all there for you, and all it remains for me to do is to thank Ron and Ronnie for being on this episode with me. And on that, I'm Brian. Have a good one, everybody.